Here we are. We're at Wednesday, which by definition means that we're at the worst part of the week. But we got something kind of fun today. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. So some things that I want to talk about at the beginning to kind of preface this. So first of all, um, this is something that we will talk about a little bit more depth about the nature and focus of AI, and that's actually one of our topics later on. Um, I think it's probably fair to say this is probably a filler piece for the course. That being said, I think that's also an important discussion to have at this point in your college careers. You will never see a more terrified group of individuals than older instructors who are thinking that AI is going to completely and totally make them obsolete with respect to instruction. Say, if you basically, the students are going to write essays, are not going to ever write essays now because they're going to have AI do the work for them and they're never going to do any homework. I think that it's important to note that there are a lot of instructors that you're going to work with that are going to be a lot more paranoid about these tools. And so I would rather put it in perspective. I think that it's more important to be able to use these tools constructively rather than destructively. That being said, some of the things we're going to do is we're going to poke a little bit of fun at AI, and then we're going to talk about how can we use AI in productive capacity. So you've probably heard a lot about the different things, the different tools of AI. Basically, what we're going to focus on is something called LLMs. All right. Has anybody heard that term before? LLMs. So that means large language models. And that's going to be kind of the focus. We're going to talk about ChatGPT. We're going to use Copilot because that's actually part of the Truman system subscription. And we're just going to do some activities to kind of see what its constraints and what its abilities are. I think my hope is by the time that we're done, we're going to come to the conclusion that these AI tools that we're going to use can make our lives easier, but they don't replace us. They don't basically make the work that we do obsolete. It requires a lot of work on our part to be able to do things properly. And if we do them properly, then the tools that we utilize can actually benefit us in much more meaningful ways. And so that's kind of the direction I wanted to go with this. But before we do that, let's just talk about some things, some experiences that I personally had with AI. So you probably heard about ChatGPT. You may regularly use ChatGPT. I know some of my colleagues at other institutions, they say they use this on a daily basis. I'm not quite to that point yet, mostly because I've got a fairly regimented routine with what I do in my academics. But I find more and more that I get to utilize this in fun and meaningful ways. So the very first thing I wanted to show you, this was actually a Facebook post that I did because I got my ChatGPT subscription last year, and I was like, what can I do with this? And this is the very first thing that I put into ChatGPT. All right. So this is the very first thing that I put into ChatGPT. I basically said, quoted the Wall Street Journal said ChatGPT will forever change the profession of auditing, because I'm an auditor and I very much care about that. So me, an auditor, said, explain agency theory to me in the style of a pirate. All right. So you can tell that my perspective is a little bit skewed. I have this massive tool that I could utilize to get any kind of knowledge or any type of insight. And I said, I wanted to talk like a pirate, but I wanted to explain an accounting concept or accounting and finance concept. And you know what? It did. It actually did. Okay. So here's the example. What it said is set up there, and it's really good. It's a really good explanation of agency theory in the style of a pirate. Talked about how the captain and the crew have differing incentives and differing motivations. And so you have to be very, very careful to make sure your crew stays in line. It's so silly and yet so good at the same time. And I have some friends on there who are very, very well versed, very intelligent, and they posted on there says, wow, that's actually really good. And I said, yeah, it is really good. It's not what I expected. All right. So that being said, for every hit, there's often a lot of misses on ChatGPT, and it's ChatGPT is going to be AI tools in general, Copilot. There are some things that you can actually throw at it, and it will be very, very confident in its response, or at least it will sound confident when you read it. All right. So this is one that was fairly. This is a fairly old one. This is back when ChatGPT started. So when you buy equipment with cash, what do you credit? All right. This is basically a 220 question. One of the very first things you learn says, well, okay, you buy the equipment, equipment's the asset, and then you're going to credit cash, and you give it up. But you look at the explanation ChatGPT gives right here. It says debit cash and credit equipment. Okay, so very simple, very remedial error that it made. By the way, if you follow up on this, it probably gets this answer correct because this was a very early version of ChatGPT that kind of gave this answer. And so There was another one that I thought was really funny. This is actually a colleague who did this. This is a colleague who was in the PhD program. So, to depreciate land, what's the journal entry? So before we move forward on this, what is the rule for depreciating land? We don't depreciate land. Land is not depreciable, okay? Hopefully you remember that from your early accounting classes. We don't depreciate land. Land is just constantly there. Can it lose value? Yes, but usually that's some sort of automatic adjustment. We don't depreciate because it doesn't have a useful life. But ChatGPT was just kind of like, okay, well, we're going to debit accumulated depreciation and credit the land account. All right. So yeah, obviously there's all kinds of things wrong with that. Aside from the fact that we don't depreciate land, if we did depreciate land, this is the wrong journal entry right here. You guys remember you have to have a depreciation expense and you credit accumulate depreciation because it's a contra asset account. So this is one of those things that as an OCD person, as an accountant, this is so many levels of cringe that I can't even explain. In fact, I'm going to change the slide because I can't handle it anymore. All right. All right. This was a recent conversation. Now I need to contextualize this. If you go to ChatGPT right now, for about the first 10 queries, it will operate on its newest version on ChatGPT 4.0. And then it will say, you run out of space, we're going to kick you back to the old version, which is ChatGPT 3.5. This is a little bit like going and talking to Dr. Caden and asking her, or Dr. Caden or Dean Prasad and asking them really high-level conceptual questions and getting really, really intelligent, articulate answers, then coming and talking to me is like, wow, this guy's kind of a dunce. All right. That's the equivalent of ChatGPT 4.0 versus ChatGPT 3.5. So I asked how many R's are in strawberry, and this was something I saw online. I said this can't possibly be correct. Okay, and it says there are two. Strawberry contains two R's. All right, which if you think about it is a technically correct statement. It does contain two R's, not just two R's. It contains multiple more R's. It contains three R's, but there are at least two R's in there. And I was like, are you sure about that? Says, I'm sure there are two R's in strawberry. Says, please check again. It's like, I have double checked. And there are indeed two R's in strawberry. And I said, all right, interesting. I count three R's. And then it actually counted the number of R's in strawberry and said, you are correct. There are three R's in strawberry. My mistake. By the way, this happens frequently where you'll find with ChatGPT will make a mistake and then you'll notify it of its correction. It will say, my apologies. You are indeed correct. Let's do that. Let's check it out. So this is, again, especially prominent when you go to 3.5. 3.5 makes all kinds of mistakes. So we're trying to think about this here. We're thinking about how AI, and remember we talked about this last week. We were doing Excels, like AI will change the face of business, and then we had the autofill of January, February, March, April. Yeah, so yeah, this is something we have to keep in mind. How can something be that profoundly impactful and just one of these things that's going to actually change the face of a world as we know it, and yet still be so simplistic in nature? And the answer is really profound. It actually, something that we learned, I was actually at a conference this summer with a bunch of educators. And one thing I will tell you is that you tend to think that we are like vast knowledge and massive amounts of information, particularly when it comes to this course, that technology we just go up there and I don't even use a mouse in Excel. I just use my mind to make this cell, the spreadsheet ahead of me. You guys put me on that level and that's not anywhere close to where I am or any other educator on the planet is. There may be a few that are close, like maybe one or two. But we do not have the vast array of skill sets you believe. We have to work really hard at it. And nowhere is this more pronounced than when you go to an accounting educator conference and you listen to some of the comments that are made. Basically, we're talking about trying to articulate information at a very high level. And then some of the questions that were asked is, okay, which cell did you click on for that particular problem? Really, really detailed instructions have to be provided. So this is why we're so paranoid about AI, is because a lot of the people are posers. A lot of accounting educators are posers, right? They like to say that they know a lot, but they don't actually know it. With respect to AI, we were talking at the conference about what AI actually is. And based on all the TV shows and movies that you've probably seen, you think that AI is kind of like Skynet from the Terminator series that's going to basically make humans obsolete and is going to take over the world. And there's a professor, I believe he's an economics and statistics professor at Wharton School of Business for University of Pennsylvania. He was not at the conference, but they referred to something he posted on Twitter. And I thought this was really profound, okay? He said the thing about LLMs that make them unintuitive is analogizing them to sci-fi AI is less useful than thinking them as infinite copies of some guy named Steve. a grad student who's great at coding and art, is widely read, but makes up stuff when pressed. So this is something that I want us to consider the context of AI, especially these LLM tools, these large language model tools. I do not want us to think of them as all-knowing. I want us to be aware that they have foibles, they have flaws, and it's possible to exploit those. Maybe not for value, but we can actually find gaps in the knowledge. And the reason I mention this is because there may be a time when you just kind of like, I really want to use an AI tool for this purpose, and you may find that the AI tool is not well suited for that purpose. So I thought it would be fun. We're going to see if we can make AI hallucinate a little bit, because I've already shown you some AI hallucinations where AI basically was very confident in its answer. There are 2 R's in strawberry, very confident in its answer. So what I would like for you to do is we're going to take about 5 minutes using one of the AI tools available to you. See if you can write a prompt that the tool is not able to correctly answer. Okay. Now, we can actually use multiple tools. If you have ChatGPT, you can use that. ChatGPT is ChatGPT 3.5 is very easy to get it to make a mistake, okay? This is gonna be a little bit more challenging. I'd like you to go to Copilot or maybe the initial ChatGPT 4.0. I want you to see if you can write something that you know the factual answer to, and then see if ChatGPT can make a mistake. Or the AI tool can make a mistake, Copilot or ChatGPT. This should be an interesting activity. And I will say that the current evolved versions, it's a lot harder to do than it was a year ago. All right. Unless you ask it how many R's are in strawberry, apparently. All right. So I'm going to kick back up. I think this is probably a rabbit hole that we could go down that would spend the rest of the class period, and everybody would be very entertained by seeing what AI tools can and cannot do. But I do have other things to talk about, so we're going to talk about those. But any examples, anything that you asked one of the AI tools that it just basically gave a wrong response to? What you got?
I asked how many C's are in the word occurrence.
Okay, and how many did it say?
2.
2, okay, yeah, all right, so that's a predictable one, yeah. It captures that information, the very beginning information, but misses the less obvious one. Any others? So, yeah.
As a swim lessons instructor, I thought, what do I know more about ChatGPT than ChatGPT does? And I thought, well, probably swimming. So I had it explain elementary backstroke to me, and it said that you use a flutter kick, which is not true. You use like kind of a frog-like kick.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, all right. And one over here?
I got, I asked it to tell me how many L's were in the word literally, and it said 2.
Okay, so the counting of the L's or the counting of the letters seems to be a weakness of it, but some explanation. So I decided to see what I could find out, and so I will say, again, this is a little bit more challenging with Copilot because Copilot's on an advantage. If you get to ChatGPT 3.5, it happens all over the time. So first of all, piece of information. If you are going to use this to help you out in college, which I do not disagree with, I'm not going to say in this class you are more than welcome to do that. That's why I have the syllabus statement on there, and hopefully other classes will be too. Be very, very cautious and be very knowledgeable about which tool you are using, because some tools are different than others, especially ChatGPT 3.5. You will get factually incorrect information from that one, and it will be very confident sounding like it's correct. But here's what I put up. I decided to throw this one in. This one is off the top of my head. All right, so I asked Copilot, said, what areas of Bloom taxonomy are tested on the Certified Public Accountant exam? Now, if you're not familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, this is basically a level of thinking that applies in education. So remembering and understanding are basically memorization, application is applying that information, analyzing is breaking down information into component parts, evaluation is judgment, and then creation is taking parts to create something new, all right? So it's important to note that on the CPA exam, we do not include create on the CPA exam. That's not something that's included on there, because if your accountant is creating things, you're probably committing fraud. So that's actually a joke that I use every time I talk about this, and it never ceases to make somebody grin about it, because it's true. But it does test all 5 parts, and that's what Copilot said. It tested these 5 parts. The problem with this is an incomplete answer. Now, I probably should have framed, and this will set the stage for what we're going to talk about. I probably should have said, individual sections of the CPA exam, what do they use? Because as a whole, the CPA exam does use the first 5 levels of Bloom's taxonomy. However, only one section actually uses evaluation. So this does not specify that not all parts of the CPA exam use it, that there are certain parts that only use the first 4 levels. So if you're planning on sitting for the CPA exam, by the way, you can say, all right, Most of my content information is gonna come down here. Gonna be, remembering, understanding application. We only get to this higher level. Then you won't have to create anything. You don't have to create anything. So you don't have to be a creative accountant. That's all I have to do. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what this represents. All right. So there are some hallucinations. These are called hallucinations. These are basically, as a friend of mine and a colleague says, is that he says that AI tools tend to be something akin to a stochastic parrot. So we all know what parrots will repeat something, and stochastic basically means with kind of random assignment over a limited array of information. And so stochastic parrot is saying that it will repeat anything it knows, and if it doesn't have the information it needs to answer a question, it will fill in the gaps based on what it does know. So this is an interesting one. This is one that was an example that I found in a slide set about an early version of this. And say, who was the president of the United States in 1895? And a hallucinated response was Benjamin Franklin. Okay. So first of all, Benjamin Franklin was never a United States president. Okay. Plus, he passed away, I believe it was in 1780 something. I don't remember what the year was. So this is like basically 100 years after he passed away. And so this is like an example of hallucination that you get if you ask it a very direct question. If you're looking for factual information, you can actually come up with something like that. Another hallucination. This is a mathematics example. So it says, what is 2 plus 4 divided by 6 times 9 divided plus 3? And the hallucinated response is 11. Now, to its credit, I do believe that the AI tool is correct in this hallucinated response. But that's because the answer or the question itself was not typed in properly. Because what was interpreted there was needed to be parentheses around the 2 plus 4 and then division of the 6 divided by 9. If you remember from PEMDAS rules, remember parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. That's the order that you're supposed to follow in mathematics. And it did follow those, but it didn't actually, because of the nature of the question, because the way the question was worded, it came up with a different answer than what was intended, simply because it was incomplete information. And that's an important point, is that this one is kind of termed as a hallucination, but I don't know that hallucination is the correct term for this, because the AI did provide the correct response. We just did not provide it with the correct input, all right? And that the important point to bring about that is that we can actually create incorrect responses if we're not careful about how we phrase our questions. Now, this is something in this day and age I think comes up more and more frequently than others, is that we tend to be very, very casual texters, and we don't even really watch our spelling, because the texting tools will often point out if we have spelling errors, or it will correct the spelling for us. But ChatGPT may not do that, or our Copilot may not do that. So you can have some problems with your inputs, and if those inputs are incorrect, it can lead to improper outputs. So ultimately, we can kind of come up with a conclusion, is that we can come up with incorrect answers if we believe that the tool itself is not appropriately identifying the piece of information it needs to note. So we've had several examples of questioning an AI tool and saying, how many letters are in it? And it just basically gives us a kind of blank response that is kind of casually correct, but not fully correct. We've had examples of lack of expertise. We've had examples of just insufficient prompting or errors on our part. So the ultimate takeaway that we need to take from this when we talk about how we're going to use AI tools is that the most important element of an AI tool is going to be the judgment of the person who's using the tool. Part of that is going to be having an expectation for what the output should be. And we'll actually talk a little bit about that later in the semester. We're going to talk about how we actually have supervised learning tools where we know what the output should be, but we utilize the supervised learning intention so that we can actually monitor whether the output is correct. That should be one of the things that we should have for first of our judgment. But the second point is, if we're utilizing it for something we're not experts in, we need to be very, very cautious and careful about how we frame our questions. Now, this is an interesting point. So this is another example of a tool. Last year, I had my graduate auditing students. We actually popped up ChatGPT and we put questions in the CPA exam, or from the CPA exam in, and basically we just did it without any context. And we said, well, here's the question, here are the answers. Is it correct? And what we found is that ChatGPT was identifying answers where the statements then the answers were factually correct, but they were not consistent with the context of the questions themselves. So how do we overcome something like that? How do we overcome where it can actually look at information and identify information that's accurate, or it can come up with responses that are accurate, but are not contextually correct? And the answer is something called prompt engineering. Okay. When I say prompt, I'm not talking about quickly. I'm talking about the prompt is the way that you frame your question or frame your query. So prompt engineering is something that probably you may not have heard of, you may have heard of, but prompt engineering basically is how we prompt these AI tools to come up with responses. And it's really, really important to understand how to do this. And it will continue to become more and more important as we use AI tools more effectively. Basically, has anybody ever heard the term GIGO? G-I-G-O? Stands for garbage in, garbage out. And it was an old term that was used to describe computer input versus computer output. If you put bad information in, you're going to get bad information as your output. We like to think that AI tools are immune to that, and they absolutely are not. These are still, consider these are still computerized mechanisms. And if we don't give them correct information, if we don't have a correct framing for that, it will give us bad responses. So our responsibility on our end is to make sure that we have good input for the AI tool. Now, I want to caution everybody, I am actually giving you ways to actually use AI tools more effectively. Do not abuse these in courses where you should not be abusing these. In this course, I hope that you will utilize these very effectively, and in courses where you should, in a course where it's like, I want you to write your own paper, don't say, oh, well, now I know how to write. Dr. Barnes taught me how to do good prompt engineering, so now I can write a multi-page paper using an AI tool, and it will look really, really good, which it wouldn't have otherwise. Again, do not abuse this. This is something that I think will be very, very beneficial for you in your college careers and your careers beyond. But it's something that has potential for abuse if you use it in the wrong way. So basically, when we are prompting, we want to make sure that we have all the criteria of the prompt specified within the question. So say, what is the objective? Okay, what is the context? What are our criteria and what are our output indicators? These are all items that should be included in the prompt in order for the AI tool to be able to respond effectively. So it knows what it is it's looking at and what its response should be. So an example that's used in this particular situation, and this is actually from Ernst & Young, EY, the accounting firm. They actually have an educational website. This is a series of slides that they presented on this topic. So give me a list of beautiful shorter hikes located in or near Glacier National Park. I'm a moderately skilled hiker who enjoys the outdoors. Make sure the list contains at least 10 hikes, avoiding the most popular and matching my preferences. So think about this in context to the prompting. That's a lot of information, a lot of detail, but keep in mind that we're trying to make sure the input is effective. The more effective the input, more detailed the input, the better our output will become. So it says, what is the objective? We want to make sure we have something for a hike. What is the context? It needs to be Glacial National Park. It needs to be somebody who can handle a good skilled hike, but is not somebody who wants to hit something that's too simple or too complex. All right, criteria, at least 10 hikes, and then avoiding the most popular and matching my preferences. And so the output indicators is going to say what are those hikes, those trails are going to be. Another example, give me a list of these top 5 rated kosher restaurants in the Dallas metro area that have an average price of $15 a meal. All right. Again, the more information, the more detail that you provide. I would say that you can probably go into a lot more detail because I lived in Dallas, and Dallas metro area is consists of multiple different suburbs and multiple different complexes. Depending on where you go, this will actually be a shorter list versus a longer list. So saying what specific area of Dallas might be more effective. All right. So let's go ahead and look at some effective versus ineffective examples. So we input a report and we say analyze the report. We don't have criteria for what analysis represents. So examine the quarterly financial report and highlight anomalies in revenue and expense accounts compared to the previous quarter. Another one, send a message to the client. Okay, what type of message that be? You could just basically, hi, my name is Michael. Okay, that would be a message to the client that doesn't really specify the parameters for the message. Draft a professional email to my client, Sam Wilson, at ABC Widget, summarizing key findings from the annual financial statement audit, suggesting a meeting to discuss further. So as we're starting to see, the more detail we provide, the more detail that the AI tools can provide in the outcome. Now, it's important to note that prompt engineering is not just about writing really, really long prompts. We need to actually be able to ascertain what the AI tool is doing whenever we're actually creating the prompt. So there are a few approaches that we can take to prompt engineering that can actually provide benefit. So let's go talk about there's 3 approaches that are very general with respect to them, and they are correlated to one another. They do relate to one another, but some of these are going to be some that we see more common than others. We may not have even thought about these other ones. So first one we're going to talk about is zero-shot prompting. This is basically where you go to an AI tool and you just provide any instructions, or instruction to perform a task without examples of how to perform that task. So you say, all right, what are the elements of I should have come up with a better example for this. I should have been prepared. Okay, so well, what did we talk about on Monday? We talked about activities models or activity models. So say, what are the different types of activity models a business can use? All right, so that would be an example of a list of information. It may provide an output list, but he may not say, all right, we don't want to use the ones that are old, the ones that are ancient. We don't want to use data flow diagrams. We don't use block diagrams. So there's kind of something that companies do not use anymore. For a more effective one, we may want to actually provide a better prompt. All right. Zero-shot prompting can be effective, assuming that we're within the purview of what AI can actually operate with. It has knowledge in that area. Now, keep in mind, remember our graduate student, Steve? We know that large language models are good at coding and art, and they are widely read, but they're not experts in all fields, despite them pretending to be experts in all fields, okay? So zero-shot prompting will be useful when we ask it something that it's got knowledge about. But what about something that's not necessarily intuitive? Say for something like accounting or business discipline that we are all familiar with. In that situation, we might want to use something called few-shot prompting. These are instructions with a small number of examples, which are called shots. So instead of cold calling and saying, here's a question, we might say, here's the type of information you might need to know about. Do your research on this information and come back being prepared to answer questions in this area. This would be akin to like a study guide for an exam. I say, here are the questions I'm likely to ask about. You all go study those topics and come back and take the exam. You are more prepared to answer in response to that. And then we have chain of thought prompting, which is basically complex reasoning through intermediate reasoning steps. It can be written as no shot or few shot. Now, this one's a lot more detailed, a lot more difficult, but if you're doing very challenging and detailed analysis with AI tools, it might be more effective. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. Zero-shot prompting. Explain the elements of the audit risk model. Again, it's just a remembering and understanding task. Describe the process for creating a web page using HTML, CSS. Write a short story about a detective who solves mysteries. And what are some effective study strategies? Again, we've not provided any context or examples for this, so this could be a random output that comes up with it. For example, if we're talking about the audit risk model, are we talking about audit risk model that's operating here in the United States? Or are we talking about audit risk model as it represents a vernacular in other countries? We've not really specified that, and we've not really said, how do we utilize the elements of audit risk model? The reason I'm bringing that one up is because that's one I know about. But zero-shot prompting could be effective. I would expect that question it comes back with a pretty reasonable response to. What about something that's going to be a little bit more articulate and detailed? Well, I'm going to bring up a tax example, which I absolutely hate. But let's go ahead and talk about few-shot prompting. This is going to be with a small number of examples. So we give it some scenarios and say, here are the scenarios that you need to be aware of. So John earned $50,000 in salary this year. John needs to report $50,000 in earned income on the tax return. This is telling the AI tool the scenario and saying, understand that this is the proper treatment. Another example, Sarah received $10,000 as inheritance for her grandmother. Tax treatment would be non-taxable income, so do not need to report $10,000. By telling this to the AI tool, it's basically saying you need to be knowledgeable of tax treatments for different scenarios. Now, the interesting thing about this is if you look down on the three examples, it asks about a fourth scenario that's not even depicted in the above three. It does not necessarily need to be a specific reference to that. It just needs to be a general reference. The general references that are being taught above are about tax treatments in different situations. So the AI tool is going to naturally incline itself to look at tax treatments in different scenarios. So the final scenario is a gift from the parents, which is not a scenario that was discussed above. It relates closely to inheritance, but is not exactly the same. What is the tax treatment? By this point, after the few shots of prompting, the AI tool should be able to say, all right, I've been studying, it's not going to tell you this, but it's going to say, I've been studying tax treatments that are going to be according to the tax framework in the United States. And here is how it should be treated from an income tax perspective purpose. This is an example of the prompting is saying that once it knows what it's looking at or the context of the information it's looking at, it should be able to answer the questions correctly. By the way, this is an interesting point. Remember the example I was talking about with the CPA exam questions? There was actually a study that was done on it fairly recently, actually multiple studies, that have tested to see how well ChatGPT could perform on the CPA exam. And when it was ChatGPT 3.5, the answer was really, really poorly, really, really badly. But then they took up ChatGPT 4.0 and they started using shot prompting, prompting that we're talking about here, and saying, here are some examples of questions that you would encounter on the CPA exam and what you need to be, the topics that you need to be prepared to answer. It actually passed pretty substantially. It was in the 90s, which, by the way, if you don't know the CPA exam, 75 is a passing grade, 90 is a really, really high passing grade. So that's kind of the example of when we give it the proper prompts and the proper preparation, these AI tools can answer really complex and challenging questions in these areas. All right, so finally we've got the chain of thought prompting. All right, this is going to be, again, our technique that allows complex reasoning through intermediate release reasoning steps. And so this would be a more akin to kind of example that I was talking about with the CPA exam. That being said, chain of thought prompting does not require that we actually have multiple or have shots in the beginning. You can provide all the context within the prompt itself. So example of a no-shot chain of thought prompt would basically be a manufacturing situation where you calculate the total cost of producing one toy contribution margin and says, show your work. The detail on this is to identify, not only provide context for answering the question, but if there are errors in the chain of thought for the AI tool, we can identify those errors and address those as necessary. More effective is going to be something called the few shot chain of prompt, where we actually provide a context with an example and a solution, and then it can go through the complex reasoning task, referring back to the tool that we've looked at before. So I realize it's a lot to take in, and there's not a whole lot to go in, or a whole lot more to go into, but what I wanted to come out with when I talked about this is to say, you all are going to be the generation that's going to be utilizing these tools more effectively than any other generation previous. I mean, the Gen Alpha they may just do everything in AI, who knows, okay? I've got two nieces who are in that generation, and I've not heard the words ChatGPT come off their lips yet, but it's still early, okay? Still early. The most important takeaway from this is this is not going to be something that's going to completely and totally change our way of life. It's going to be something that we control, that we use to change our way of life. And the better that we are using these AI tools, the better output that we'll get with this and the better results we'll get. So a big part of that is going to be learning how we actually structure our responses, or how we structure our inputs so we can get these strong outputs. All right. Well, that's pretty much all I've got for today. I thought it would take a little bit longer. Again, anybody who really wants to stick around for the last 13 minutes. All right. Your next homework, or your first homework assignment, is due on Friday. It's chapter 1 and 2 homework. We will go through our first Excel activity, and then we'll review the Excel assignment at the end of class. I'll see you all then.